Merry Meet, Annie here. I have been wanting to do this video for quite some time. I was inspired, it's been a couple of months ago when Bob Hickman was sharing his secret source for incense makings, which was the dollar store, and it took me back in time to, at least the first decade of when I was a baby witch and learning to make incense and had no money, and I grew things to make incense from, and I used what was in my kitchen. There was no such thing as collecting things like resins or oils or anything that cost money. It had to be cheap or free in order for me to use it. So I gathered up tonight from my kitchen all the things that I would have used in those days, and I'm going to show you a little bit about making incense on a budget that requires no items you really wouldn't find around your house, or things that aren't easy to get in the grocery and cheap to get. So what is my motley collection of things? The one thing I have never given up is I have always used a salad bowl for mixing my incense. And amongst the collection of things in front of you there is a wine glass, which can be any container from your kitchen cupboard. A wooden spoon, salt, plastic ice cream dipper. We have paper, and, before I dump them all, a bunch of spices I grabbed out of my spice cabinet coming back here to do this video for you. Any bowl that you grabbed, any cup, any mug. In this case, I'm using a glass wine glass just so that you can see that I'm putting the salt in it. So where you might start is check out your spice cabinet. See what you've got and make a list of what you have. And then it's very easy online, or perhaps even in books you might have, to find out the properties of the spices you have at hand, and you work then with what you have at hand. So I have decided that I'm going to do a sample incense, which is going to be something I need courage for. I want to do an incense to then do a meditation and burn my incense and lend myself some courage for something. So I've looked at the spices that I have pulled here, and I'm going to pull several which have qualities which lend themselves to courage. So here are 4 kitchen spices that I'm going to use to make an incense for courage. Bay leaves. I'm putting bay in this mixture because bay has magical properties that have to do with strength. Just being strong in the face of whatever it is that's making me nervous. Cloves. I have picked cloves because the fire aspect of cloves, in one of its many magical uses, is specifically to ease or totally get rid of fear. Cinnamon. You may be guessing here that there's a little bit of a fire thing happening here with bay and cloves, and now cinnamon. Cinnamon I am selecting for my fondness for using cinnamon whenever I want heat, when I want that kind of passion coursing through the veins, stand in the face of something, be strong, have things come from my most powerful center, my own personal will. I use cinnamon a lot. And the 4th one I pulled is basil. Confidence. Not just having the courage to get out there and do something, but the confidence that you can do it and will do it well. So we have bay, basil, cinnamon, and cloves. Okay, you are going to need something to measure your incense with. It can be any spoon. I happen to have the measurement spoons that I use when I make my incenses actually are standard measuring spoons. Even a teaspoon, if you don't have measuring spoons, is going to work. You'll just use part of it or all of it or half of it or measure it in some way. I am going to, in this case, I'm going to begin though. There's nothing I need to measure. I'm going to begin with the bay leaves. And I've taken out 4 bay leaves. Picked out a couple that were pretty good size. If I had picked out smaller ones, I probably would have put in a couple extra. Now, why I like using a mixture of the things that come whole, like bay leaves, and other things that come whole in our spice cabinets is there's something about what you do when you manipulate it, when you manipulate any of these things. So the bay leaves we're going to break up with our hands. And as we are using our hands and touching the bay leaf, we are thinking of the intent, the reason why we selected bay to put it in this mixture. I'm now going to add a teaspoon of the basil leaves. Well, the reason we use things to measure is you want to, as you're making any of your incense, you want to write what you put into your mixture. And the reason is we all sometimes come up with incense that we really, really like and can never recreate it. And we want to be able to recreate something that we really, really like. It's also if you have put in certain amounts of different of your spices and it needs something else. You need to add something else to it. Then you know what your percentages were to know what you might want to add or decrease. If I ended up burning this and all it did was smell like bay, or all it did was smell like basil, I would want to adjust that the next time. So measuring isn't so much as you're going to a book and following a recipe so much as when you're making your own things. You know what you have in your book where you record what you're doing, the intent you had for each of the herbs or spices that you used, how it turned out for you, how did it feel, because you might want to adjust it the next time, or you might want to revisit it and need to know, what did I do before? So I put a teaspoon. I opened up the clove and it smells so good. I'm going to put half of a teaspoon of clove in. Now I know from experience that clove can be an overpowering smell, so I'm not going to match it and put a teaspoon in like I did of the basil. I want a little bit less. If you had only a teaspoon or a tablespoon to work with, you would fill it up for one and do it half for the next, so you can measure it that roughly. And the cinnamon, I'm also putting in a half of a teaspoon. So I don't know how well you can see what we have inside our bowl. As we added each one, we would have been adding our intent for it. Knowing the reasons we picked it. I like to pick my herbs when I make incense and write them in my book first. Maybe not even so much the how much of each I'm going to use, but list them and put next to it why I am putting that into my incense. And then as you are stirring them together, you can be thinking of the end result you wanted by combining them all. Now I'm going to assume that you do not have a mortar and pestle. So a couple of things you can do is use something as simple as the bottom of your spice container. A spoon can also work well if you take it to the edge of your bowl and take it to the edge and beat it from the side. Doesn't really work well if you're down inside, but you can take it to the outside and beat it. Another thing I have used is an ice cream scoop. The roundness of that kind of mimics what the mortar and pestle combination would be. And it will not surprise those of you who know my affinity with rocks to know my very favorite way outside of a mortar and pestle to grind incense is with a rock. So what we have here, it's a little bit coarse. It'll work perfectly fine. But there's one more kitchen gadget that I really like. I even use this when I'm making my I actually use it rather regularly, so I shouldn't pretend I don't. And that is what is sometimes referred to as a coffee grinder and sometimes referred to as a spice grinder. And a lot of us have them in our kitchens. I know I have mine for coffee grinding. This one I actually keep in my meditation room for making incense only. But we are not using anything other than kitchen herbs in this. So it is perfectly safe. We're not using resins or anything exotic in here. We are just using kitchen herbs. So we can very easily use this to make our incense finer. Now this is simple. What you do not want to do though is turn it on and beat the heck out of it. You don't want to heat your herbs. Whether you're working with kitchen herbs or you're adding resins, you do not want to heat the herbs. So you're going to hold it down for maybe a count of 3 and then let it go. You don't keep at it. Give it a minute to settle. No more than the count of 3. And I'll do it one more time. And what we have now is a bit more of a refined powder. It's still coarse. I didn't want to turn it fluffy. So what we have here is something that has almost the quality of, say, sawdust. It's about that kind of thing. So if we are going to talk about burning incense on a budget, one of the things we're not going to have is the briquettes that we burn incense on. We are not going to have that in hand. So I'm going to show you a trick that was taught me once. So you want a piece of paper that's about, a couple inches wide. So that's what we're going to do with this. So we are going to wrap our paper around any round object. What we want to is, all we want is a tube. Okay, once we have the tube rolled, we're going to take it and we're going to set it in our salt. Now, if your kitchen has a tiny sieve, you're in luck. If it doesn't, you use your hands and you slowly pinch your incense into your tube. And if you have one of these, it's a lot easier. A lot of our kitchens have them and a lot of kitchens don't have them, so it's according to what your kitchen has. So we are going to fill up the tube that we have in our salt. Now again, the entire time you are doing this with your magical intent at hand, which is about courage and strength, fire, which you're holding inside you as passion, and confidence. And when you get towards the end, what you're going to want to do is raise it up, and you can't see this at all, sorry, it's the way I've got my hands here. Raise it up so that you can fill in the top by tamping down a little bit and adding more the top of your tube. So, that is what you have. Kind of looks like a cigarette standing up in your salt. And it won't surprise you that the next thing we're going to do is light the incense here. We want the paper to catch on fire. You can burn incense by itself with nothing around it. The problem is that according to the dampness of it, it might not always catch very well. And I will show you something that can come in really handy. There it is, and it's burning. And perhaps you want to be doing a magic where you want to keep building your intent and adding it to the intent. What you would do is you would take a pinch of your incense and add it to the top. because it's going to burn on its own. But if part of your magic is you want to feed that fire and keep it going, the only thing you need to be careful of is you don't add too much at a time, because if you do, you will smother your fire and have to light your fire again. The paper, when you lit the paper, in addition to touching the match to the top of the incense, what happens is you get a surround to the flame, and it actually sets the incense burning pretty evenly, and it will keep going. The only tricks are not to pack it down too tight, and if you find that this is not, but if it were going out on me, I would simply relight the papers around the edge, and if your paper is flaming, then you would blow it out like you would incense in a cone or a stick that you want to dull it down to. Like a candle, this incense should not be left unattended. If you want to use this to bless your quarters, you can move this around. The glass will not be hot because the salt is keeping it from getting hot. So there are many ways in which that can come in really handy. And any bowl will work.